The move to the quiet fringe of Sacramento was meant to be a reset, a deliberate untangling from the snarled mess of my previous life. For years, I had existed in the perpetual hum of downtown, where sirens were the city's lullaby and the lives of strangers bled through the paper-thin walls of my apartment. I craved the opposite: the gentle rustle of leaves, the respectful distance between homes, the profound silence of a street asleep. This little bungalow, with its unassuming facade and a backyard shielded by a tall wooden fence, was supposed to be my fortress of solitude. It was a place to finally, truly be alone. My work, a demanding position in data analysis, often held me captive until long after the sun had surrendered the sky. The hours bled into one another, leaving me drained, a husk of a person who wanted nothing more than to collapse into the quiet embrace of my new home. On these nights, the kitchen was a landscape I had no energy to navigate. Cooking was a distant memory, a hobby for a version of myself with more vitality. Takeout had become my ritual, a small act of self-preservation. My go-to was a small family-run Chinese place, Golden Dragon, whose reliability was as comforting as the food itself. One Tuesday in the deep end of October, the day had been particularly brutal. A critical server had crashed, and the fallout had been a cascade of frantic calls and meticulous mind-numbing work. When I finally turned the key in my front door, the clock on the microwave glared back at me. 10:08 p.m. An acidic gnawing in my stomach reminded me I'd skipped both lunch and dinner. The thought of even boiling water felt like an insurmountable task. Defeated, I sank onto the sofa, the phone feeling heavy in my hand as I navigated to the familiar ordering app. General Tso's chicken, extra spicy, and an egg roll. The digital confirmation promised delivery in 30 to 40 minutes. I spent the waiting period in a daze, tidying the debris of my morning rush: a stray coffee mug here, a discarded jacket there. Each small act was an attempt to reclaim a sense of order in my life, to smooth the frayed edges of the day. The house was still a perfect vessel for the peace I had so desperately sought. I was just arranging a stack of mail on the kitchen counter when the doorbell chimed. My body tensed. I glanced at my phone. It had only been 20 minutes, far too early. Golden Dragon was consistent, but never miraculously fast. A knot of caution, an instinct honed by years of living as a woman, alone, tightened in my chest. I padded silently to the front door, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. Before my hand even touched the deadbolt, my eye was pressed against the brassy circle of the peephole. The distorted, fisheye view revealed a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s. He was unnervingly average. Dark jeans, a plain gray zip-up hoodie with the hood down, and a nondescript blue baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He stood with a strange stillness, his hands jammed into his pockets. It was this detail that sent the first real jolt of alarm through me. There was no white paper bag steaming with food, no crinkling plastic carrier, no thermal delivery case. There was nothing. His hands were empty. My voice, when I called through the door, was steadier than I felt. "Can I help you?" He shifted his weight, his head tilting up slightly. "Delivery," he said. His voice was muffled, flat. "I think you're a little early," I replied, keeping my tone light, probing. "Where's the food?" There was a beat of silence, a fractional pause that felt like a chasm. "Oh, right. Sorry, I grabbed the wrong bag from the car. Just wanted to make sure this was the right address before I went back to get it. Didn't want to make the trip twice." The logic was a tangled mess. It made no sense. In all my years of ordering food, from pizza to pad thai, no driver had ever come to the door empty-handed to confirm the address. They had the address, it was on the receipt. They had GPS. My internal alarms, which had been chiming softly, now began to blare. This was wrong. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The quiet neighborhood, the wide, empty street, my isolated little house, it all suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage. "That's okay," I said, my voice hardening, the false politeness evaporating. "Why don't you go get the food from your car, and I'll meet you right here when you get back." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Another pause, longer this time. I watched his shape through the peephole, a blurry silhouette of indecision. "It'll just take a second if you open the door," he insisted, a new edge to his voice. It was a strange cocktail of pleading and impatience. "I just need to be sure. My boss gets mad if I go to the wrong house. Bring the food to the door," I repeated, my voice now as cold and hard as the lock I refused to turn. "I'm not opening the door until I see the order." I could almost feel his frustration radiating through the solid wood. He muttered something I couldn't understand, a low guttural sound of defeat. Then, he turned abruptly and walked away, not with the brisk purpose of a delivery driver on a mission, but with a slow, almost reluctant gait. He didn't head for a car parked at the curb. Instead, he simply ambled down the driveway and disappeared into the thick, inky darkness of the street. I stayed at the peephole for 5 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching the empty space where he had been. He wasn't coming back. My hands trembled as I unlocked my phone and dialed the restaurant. The manager, a kindly man named Mr. Chen, answered. I recounted the bizarre encounter, my voice tight with adrenaline. There was a pause on his end, The sound of clicking keys. "Mom," he said, his tone laced with confusion. "That is very strange. Your order ... It is still here. My driver, Jimmy, he is just putting it in the bag to leave now. He has not left the restaurant yet." A cold dread, slick and oily, washed over me. The man at my door wasn't a delivery driver. He was a liar. My sanctuary had been targeted. I thanked Mr. Chen, hung up, and immediately called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher was calm, professional, but the story sounded thin even to my own ears. A man came to the wrong house. He was weird. He left. She promised to have a patrol car swing through the area but advised me, in a tone that suggested I was overreacting, to simply keep my doors locked. I didn't need the advice. I moved through my house like a ghost, a frantic dance of security checks. Every window latch was clicked shut, every curtain drawn. I slid the security bar into the track of the sliding glass door in the back, a feature I'd never felt the need to use before. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. It was listening. 20 minutes later, the real delivery arrived. The driver was Jimmy, a cheerful older man with a kind smile, the same man who had delivered my food a dozen times before. The sight of him, holding the familiar white bag, was so profoundly reassuring that I almost sagged with relief. I took the food, tipped him far too much, and locked the door behind him, feeling a fragile sense of normalcy return. I ate the spicy chicken while standing in the kitchen, too agitated to sit, my eyes darting towards the windows. I tried to rationalize. It was a prank, a mistake, a would-be burglar who was scared off easily. I had just finished rinsing my plate when I heard it, a faint, metallic scrape from the rear of the house. It was so quiet I thought I'd imagined it, the house settling, a branch against the siding. But then it came again, more distinct this time, scrape click. It was the sound of metal gently, experimentally, testing metal. It was coming from the back door. My breath hitched in my throat. The rationalizations vaporized, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of terror. He hadn't left. He had circled around. He was testing the lock one had so carefully secured. Panic seized me, a cold, paralyzing wave. But beneath it, a sliver of ice-cold fury took hold. This was my house. He would not take it from me. I snatched my phone from the counter, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I crept silently from the kitchen, down the short hallway, my back pressed against the wall. I hid in the shadowed alcove of my bedroom doorway, where I had a partial view of the living room and the faint light filtering from the kitchen. I dialed 911, my thumb hovering over the call button. The scraping stopped. Silence descended again, thick and heavy for a full minute. Nothing happened. Was he gone? Did he give up then? A new sound, a soft, rhythmic thump, 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 against the sliding glass door. He was trying to jostle the security bar loose from its track. My heart was a wild bird beating against my ribs. I pressed call, whispering my voice a ragged thread of sound. I told the dispatcher what was happening. "He's at my back door, the man from before. He's trying to get in." This time there was no placid dismissal. There was urgency. "Stay on the line with me. Officers are en route. Can you get somewhere safe? A locked room?" "I'm in my bedroom doorway." I breathed. "I can't move." The thumping became more aggressive, punctuated by the angry rattle of the door in its frame. He was losing patience. The security bar was holding. But for how long? The thought of the glass shattering, of him pouring into my home, was a vision from a nightmare. I could hear his muffled curses now, sounds of pure rage. Then, through the cacophony of my own terror, a new sound emerged from the distance, a faint, rising siren. It grew louder, closer, a beautiful, wailing promise of salvation. The noise at the back door stopped instantly. The night was silent again, save for the approaching wail of the police. Flashing red and blue lights painted my walls in strobing phantasmagoric patterns. I stayed frozen until a firm, commanding knock came at my front door. "Police department, ma'am. Are you okay?" It took 2 days for the detective to call me back with the news that truly broke me. They hadn't caught him that night, but my neighbor's new security camera, the one aimed down the street, had captured his car on unmarked beat-up sedan parked in the shadows 2 blocks away. But that wasn't the worst of it. The detective, a woman with a tired, kind voice, asked me a question that made my blood run cold. "Have you shopped at the Franklin Boulevard Safeway recently?" "I had 4 days ago." They pulled the surveillance footage from the parking lot. She explained gently. "He was there, ma'am. He never went inside the store. The footage shows him waiting by the exit. He watched you walk to your car. He watched you put your groceries away. And then he followed you home." The horror was absolute. This wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. He had chosen me. He had followed me. He had waited. The police later discovered he'd illegally paid an acquaintance with access to a DMV database to run my license plate and get my name and address. He knew who I was before he ever set foot on my porch. He hadn't come for my things. He had come for me. Months later, they caught him. He was arrested during a similar attempt on another woman across town. His name was just a name, his face in the mugshot just a face. But the knowledge of him, of his patient, predatory planning, became a permanent part of my home. I installed a state-of-the-art security system with cameras and motion-active floodlights that turned my yard into a stark, overlit stage at the slightest hint of movement. But those were just walls and wires. The true damage was to the silence. The peace I had moved here for was gone forever, replaced by the ghost of his presence. Now, when I'm home alone and night falls, I listen, and in the quiet I can still hear the faint, hungry sound of a stranger at my door. The week had scraped me raw, leaving me with a bone-deep weariness that only the promise of a mindless Friday night could begin to soothe. The world outside my living room window was a watercolor wash of deepening twilight and the soft glow of distant streetlights. Inside I was building a cocoon, the plush sofa, a ridiculously soft throw blanket, and the comforting heft of a mug of hot tea. All that was missing was the final ingredient, a distraction. I scrolled aimlessly through the television guide, my thumb swiping past a litany of reality shows and grim news broadcasts. Nothing felt right. I wanted comfort. I wanted nostalgia. And then I saw it. Home Alone, a jolt of pure, unadulterated childhood joy shot through me. It was more than a movie. It was a time machine, a direct portal to Christmas mornings spent in pajamas, the smell of cinnamon in the air, the world a safe and magical place. Without a second thought, I clicked select. The familiar John Williams score filled the room, and I smiled, sinking deeper into the cushions. The movie was a warm blanket for the soul. I laughed at Kevin's antics, winced at Buzz's cruelty, and felt the familiar pang of emotion as his mother began her desperate journey home. The house was quiet. The neighborhood settled into its sleepy weekend rhythm. I was perfectly, blissfully content. The film reached its third act, the part that was pure slapstick genius. The wet bandits, Harry and Marv, were beginning their clumsy, ill-fated assault on the McAllister house. The tension in the film was playful, a cartoonish dance of hunter and prey. On screen, Marv, crowbar in hand, was stealthily prying open a basement window, his face a mask of idiotic concentration. The score swelled with a comical sense of foreboding. He gave the window frame one last, decisive pull. It was in that exact instant, the precise cinematic moment of the break-in, that the window to my immediate right exploded inwards. The sound was a physical blow, a deafening concussion of shattering glass that ripped through the cozy atmosphere of my living room. It wasn't the tinkling break of the movie. It was a violent, visceral roar. Shards of glass, like a spray of frozen razors, flew across the room, peppering the carpet and across the coffee table. My tea mug leaped from its coaster and smashed on the floor. My heart didn't just jump, it detonated in my chest. I whipped my head towards the sound, my mind struggling to process the sudden, brutal intrusion of reality into my nostalgic escape. Framed in the jagged maw of the broken window was a figure, tall, broad, and clad entirely in black tactical gear. From head to toe, a black balaclava was stretched taut over his head, erasing any trace of humanity, leaving only two dark, empty holes for eyes. In his gloved hand, he held a crowbar, identical to the one Marv held on the television screen, which was still playing. A bizarre and horrifying soundtrack to my own home invasion. For a frozen second, my brain short-circuited. The line between fiction and reality blurred into a nauseating smear. The man at the window was a phantom, an impossibly real echo of the image on the screen. Panic, cold and absolute, slammed into me, locking the air in my lungs. I was paralyzed, a spectator, in my own nightmare. Before I could even formulate a scream, a second violation occurred, one that was infinitely more terrifying. An arm thick as a python snaked around my throat from behind the sofa. An iron grip clamped down on my neck, yanking me back hard against the cushions and cutting off my breath. A hand smelling of cold night air and gasoline slapped over my mouth. My eyes, wide with a terror I had never known, darted wildly. There were two of them, one at the window and one already inside. He had been behind me the whole time, a silent predator in the shadows of my sanctuary. I was trapped, being suffocated, while the movie I had chosen for comfort played on its cheerful, chaotic score, a mocking counterpoint to my silent, desperate struggle. The attacker behind me was immensely strong, his grip a vice. I bucked and kicked, my bare feet finding no purchase, my flailing arms connecting with nothing but air. My lungs burned. Black spots danced in my vision. This is it, a primal part of my brain screamed. This is how it ends. But as the world began, too dim, a different instinct flared to life, a ferocious cornered animal desperation. I remembered a self-defense class I'd been forced to take in college, a single Saturday afternoon seminar I'd mostly forgotten. Weak points. Surprise is your only weapon. With a surge of adrenaline that felt like fire in my veins, I drove my right elbow backwards as hard as I possibly could. I aimed for the soft, vulnerable space of his ribs. My elbow connected with a sickening fleshy thud. The man behind me grunted, a sharp exhalation of pained surprise. His grip faltered for a single, crucial heartbeat. It was enough. I twisted, ducking under his arm, tearing his hand from my mouth. I scrambled off the sofa, tumbling onto the glass-strewn carpet, the sharp edges digging into my palms and knees. I didn't pause to think. I didn't look back. I bolted. My bare feet, clad only in socks, pounded across the living room floor. That man from the window was just starting to climb through the shattered frame, but my sudden escape had caught him off guard. I flew past him, my mind a blank slate of pure, unthinking flight. I fumbled with the deadbolt on the front door, my fingers slick with sweat and blood from the glass. The lock clicked open. I threw the door wide and plunged into the frigid night. The street was deserted, bathed in the sterile orange glow of the sodium lamps. Each house was dark, a silent witness. My pajamas offered no protection against the biting wind. Behind me I heard the crash of someone landing on the floor inside, followed by a shouted curse. Heavy footsteps pounded in pursuit. I ran, with the speed born of sheer terror, my lungs screaming, my legs pumping on pure instinct. Thank God for the years I'd spent on the high school track team. The muscle memory was still there, buried deep, and it took over now, propelling me down. The silent pavement, the sound of their pursuit was a terrifying drumbeat behind me, two sets of heavy rhythmic footfalls. They were chasing me. I didn't dare run in a straight line. I veered sharply, cutting across a neighbor's lawn, the wet grass soaking my socks. I vaulted a low hedge and sprinted down a narrow alleyway between two houses. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. They were faster than me. I could hear their strained breathing. A wave of despair washed over me. They were going to catch me at the end of the alley. I saw my chance. A thick, overgrown cluster of pine trees in the corner of another yard. With my last ounce of strength, I dove into the scratchy foliage, burrowing deep into the shadows at the base of the trunks. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapped my arms around my head, and held my breath until my lungs felt like they would burst. I heard them crash out of the alleyway, stopping just feet from my hiding place. "Where'd he go?" one of them rasped, his voice a low, gravelly growl. "I don't know, damn it. He was right here," the other one spat. Their flashlights cut beams through the darkness, sweeping across the yards, the light passing terrifyingly close to my hiding spot several times. I made myself smaller, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in, praying for them to be blind, praying for them to give up. After what felt like an eternity of agonizing, frozen silence, one of them sighed in frustration. "Forget it. He's gone. Let's get out of here before someone calls the cops." I heard their footsteps retreat, fading back down the street until they were gone. I remained in my hiding spot for a full 20 minutes, trembling uncontrollably, the cold seeping deep into my bones. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car, sent a fresh spike of fear through me. Finally, cautiously, I crawled out from the trees. My journey back to my house was a slow, terrified creep. I stayed in the shadows, my head on a swivel. The front door was still wide open, a gaping wound in the side of my home. The television was still on. As I stepped inside, the scene playing was Kevin McAllister, having successfully defended his home, reuniting with his mother. The tender music filled the wrecked, glass-strewn room, a surreal and sickening juxtaposition. My hand shook so badly it took 3 attempts to dial 911. The police arrived with a quiet, grim efficiency. They swept the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their voices low and serious. The intruders were long gone. As I gave my statement, wrapped in a scratchy police blanket, one of the officers noticed the TV. "Home Alone, huh?" he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. Weird coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a violation. They had turned my nostalgia into a weapon. They had taken a symbol of safety and childhood and twisted it into the backdrop for my terror. In the days that followed, I had the window replaced and a state-of-the-art security system installed. The house was now a fortress, bristling with cameras and sensors. But the feeling of safety was shattered beyond repair. Weeks later, I still can't stand the quiet. The silence is filled with echoes, the phantom crunch of footsteps on glass, the imagined feeling of a hand clamping over my mouth, and I can't watch movies anymore. The flickering screen no longer offers an escape. It's a reminder of the night the monsters on the screen crawled out, broke through the glass, and stepped into my life. In my line of work, you develop a certain kind of sight. I'm a detective with the Metro Nashville Police Property Crimes Division. It's not the high-stakes world of homicide you see on TV. It's a slow, grinding process of paperwork, follow-ups, and learning to read the quiet stories that stolen objects leave behind. You learn to notice the pry marks on a window frame that are just a little too clean, the single muddy footprint on a welcome mat, the subtle language of a house that has been violated. This sight, this habit of observation, doesn't switch off when you clock out. It follows you home. So when my wife Erin and I finally closed on our first house, a modest brick ranch in the sleepy Nashville suburb of Spring Hill, my mind was a split screen of new homeowner giddiness and a detective's methodical threat assessment. The neighborhood felt like a postcard of suburban safety: tidy lawns, kids' bicycles left on driveways, and neighbors who waved as we directed the moving. truck. The previous owners, a retired couple chasing the Florida sun, had left the place broom clean empty save for the faint, lingering scent of potpourri and the hum of the old refrigerator. We spent the first 2 days in a whirlwind of cardboard and packing tape. By the second night, with most of the boxes corralled into what would become the guest room, my professional instincts kicked in. I'm gonna map out the attic access and check the smoke detectors, I announced to Aaron, who was already half asleep on the couch. It was an old habit, a mental blueprint I made of any new space. The access panel was a simple square of drywall in the hallway ceiling. I unfolded the rickety pull-down ladder, the wooden steps groaning under my weight, and climbed into the oppressive, dusty heat of the attic. My flashlight beam cut a bright cone through the darkness, illuminating a universe of insulation fluff and exposed wooden beams. I swept the light from left to right, a routine check, and then I froze. Against the far wall, nestled between the rafters, sat a collection of 13 cardboard boxes. They were uniform in size, neatly sealed with packing tape. Each one was labeled in thick black marker with 2 words, Lofton and Larkspur Drive. My blood ran cold. Larkspur Drive was over 20 miles away on the other side of the county. There was no connection to us, to our movers, or to the seller's forwarding address in Sarasota. Mark, what is it? Erin's voice drifted up from the hallway below. She climbed partway up the ladder, her face a mask of confusion as her eyes followed my flashlight beam to the stack of boxes. Did the movers put someone else's stuff up there? Shouldn't have, I murmured, my mind already running through possibilities. They scanned every box on and off the truck. I moved cautiously across the joists, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. I selected one of the smaller boxes and carefully sliced the tape with my pocket knife. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were hand-knitted sweaters, the kind an elderly woman would wear, smelling faintly of mothballs. Another box held dusty, framed photos of an old couple smiling on a park bench, the autumn leaves of the Great Smoky Mountains blazing behind them. They were memories. Someone's life, packed away and stored in the wrong attic. It was bizarre, but I chalked it up to a colossal, inexplicable mistake. We'd call the moving company in the morning. I closed the hatch, folded the ladder and tried to push the mystery of the Lofton boxes from my mind. At 2:17 a.m. I was jolted awake by the buzz of my phone on the nightstand, a motion alert from the cheap, battery-powered security camera I'd temporarily placed on the kitchen counter. I squinted at the screen, my mind still thick with sleep. Before I could even process the notification, we both heard it. It was a sound that did not belong, soft, deliberate footstep directly above our bedroom ceiling. Then another. This wasn't the random popping of an old house settling. This was the distinct, rhythmic creak of weight being placed on the attic joists. Heel, toe, slow, careful, and undeniably human. Instinct took over. Years of training bypassed thought. I was out of bed in a silent motion, my hand already on the cool metal of the small safe in my nightstand. The tumblers clicked, and my off-duty Glock felt cold and heavy in my palm. Stay here. Don't make a sound, I whispered to Erin, who was sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror. I slipped into the hallway, gun held low and ready. The attic ladder was still folded flush with the ceiling, its metal hooks securely latched. My mind reeled. If someone was up there, they hadn't used this entrance. How did they get in? Who was walking over our heads as we slept? My fingers shaky, I dialed 911 on my cell, keeping my voice to a low, urgent whisper. Even as a cop, in my own home, in my own jurisdiction. Procedure was everything. You are a victim first. You make the call. While the dispatcher kept me on the line, I did a frantic silent sweep of the house. Every window was locked. Every door was deadbolted. There was no broken glass, no sign of forced entry. The footsteps above had stopped, plunging the house into a silence that was 1,000 times more terrifying than the noise had been. 2 Spring Hill patrol cars glided to a stop outside, their lights off. I let in officers Morales and Denton, 2 young cops I knew from the precinct. With them flanking me, I pulled the ladder down once more. We ascended into the suffocating darkness of the attic, our flashlight beams dancing nervously. The 13 boxes were still there, but they were different now. Every single one had been sliced open. Their contents, the sweaters, the photographs, the trinkets of a life were gone. The boxes were empty voids. We moved deeper into the attic, towards the chimney stack, and that's when we found the nest. Tucked into a dark corner, invisible from the access hatch, was a filthy camping mattress, 3 empty-gallon jugs of water, and a small pile of granola bar wrappers. Next to the mattress was a plastic grocery bag from the city mission pantry. Someone had been living here. Morales radioed for a canine unit as my own flashlight beam found the exit. It was a small, square vent on the gable wall, leading out onto the low-pitched roof over the garage. In the thick dust and insulation around the opening, I saw it. A single, perfect boot print, a waffle tread pattern, pointing inward. The matching print, pointing outward, wasn't there. He could have dropped to the garage roof and vanished, or he could still be in the house. The next few hours were a blur of methodical police work invading my personal space. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, waking up confused residents. A thermal camera swept the property, finding nothing. Back in the attic, I sifted through the empty boxes one last time. At the bottom of one, I found a single, folded piece of paper the intruder had missed. An unemployment benefits letter addressed to a Mrs. Nora Lofton. My stomach twisted. I knew that name. A welfare check call from the previous year. An elderly woman, deceased in her home from natural causes. The report had mentioned a transient son, a petty thief named Derek Lofton. Morales ran the name. No active warrants, but a citation for trespassing just 2 months ago. He'd been caught sleeping in an abandoned shed. My eyes fell on the closing paperwork for our house, still sitting in a pile on the kitchen table. I frantically searched for the seller's disclosure. Roof inspection, August 25th. The report was clean. Derek Lofton's trespassing citation was August 29th. The timeline clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He had been evicted from his last squatting place and, knowing his late mother's belongings were stored somewhere, sought a new refuge. He must have found our house empty, waiting for new owners. He had moved in sometime after the roof inspection and before our final walkthrough. He had been living in our attic for weeks. He'd listened to us on our tour, talking excitedly about where to put the sofa. He'd watched the electricians install new light fixtures. He had been a silent, unseen tenant, a ghost in our rafters, waiting for the cover of night to slip down and move about our home. And he'd brought his mother's belongings with him, like a shrine. On a hunch, I checked the small crawlspace access door in the garage. The sellers had left a cheap padlock on it. It was still locked, but a closer look revealed fresh, deep scratches around the hasp. A simple shim would have opened it. He had his own private entrance. He could come and go as he pleased a few days. Later, the call came. Derek Lofton had been arrested in a neighboring county, trying to pawn jewelry from a recent burglary. In his backpack, they found an SD card. The contents were sent to me. My hand shook as I inserted it into my laptop. It contained dozens of video files. The first was shot weeks ago. Shaky footage of our empty living room, taken through a small ventilation grill in the ceiling. Then, there were videos of Aaron and me moving boxes, arguing over what color to paint the kitchen. Me, asleep on the couch, Aaron, doing yoga in the living room. He had been watching everything, documenting our lives from above. The last file was from the night we discovered him. It was pure chaos. The video was dark, filled with the sound of his own heavy, panicked breathing. My voice, calling up into the attic, could be heard faintly. The camera jerked wildly, catching a glimpse of the night sky as he dropped from the roof onto the lawn below and ran. Derek Lofton is in state prison now. We installed a new security system, the kind with motion sensors that would detect a mouse. I have a camera aimed at the attic joists 24/7. Erin says I'm paranoid, but she never argues when I check the feed before we go to sleep. The house is secure, the walls are solid, but the knowledge of him, of his silent, patient observation, has fundamentally changed the space. It's a constant reminder that security is an illusion. You can lock your doors and bar your windows, but you can never account for the threats that are already inside, living a secret, parallel life in the darkness just above you.